Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, our next video about the cardiac cycle. In the previous video, we talked about the Bohr shift, and I told you about the structure of heart, about the morphology of heart. And today, we will discuss how this heart muscular pumping work and how blood is circulating throughout the body. So, the first thing which comes on our mind, what do you mean by cardiac cycle? Cardiac cycle basically is the sequence of events which in 1 minute takes place while heart is beating. So cardiac cycle means the sequence of events in one heartbeat. The sequence of events in one heartbeat. Look at the structure of the heart here. And I told you in the previous class, it's not labeled, but in the previous video it was already labeled that the two upper chambers of the heart are atria and the lower two are the ventricles. And there are 6 valves totally in the heart. So let me to tell you once again about these chambers. Here we have the valve which is called the tricuspid valve, and this one is called the mitral valve, and both of these valves are known as, collectively we use the word atrioventricular valves. Now, since we have 4 chambers, we have 4 blood vessels, and each blood vessel is connected to each chamber. Like this chamber, which is the right atrium, as I told you in the previous video, it's right atrium, and this right atrium is connected to a blood vessel which is called vena cava. And this chamber, which is called the right ventricle, it is connected to these. If you focus here, these green arrows shows its continuity with this blood vessel. So blood is moving like in this way out of the heart toward the lungs. So that's the pulmonary artery, because it's carrying blood away from the heart, so it's pulmonary artery. And then the blood is returning back again into the heart through these vessels, which is called pulmonary vein. So 4 blood vessels we have. You know, this is the aorta. So we have 4 blood vessels. Look at here once again. Vena cava connected to the right atrium. Pulmonary artery is connected to the right ventricle. Pulmonary vein is connected to the left ventricle. And I'm sorry, it's like the left ventricle with the blue. Left ventricle is connected through these blue line toward the aorta. So aorta is connected with the left ventricle. Now, what about the pulmonary vein? The pulmonary vein basically connected, like I'm just going to show it with the black line here. So it is connected with the left atrium. So left atrium is connected with the pulmonary vein. Right ventricle is connected with the pulmonary artery, and the right atrium is connected with the vena cava. Similarly, the left ventricle is connected with the aorta. Now, all these chambers and their connectivity, we will discuss in this topic now how pressure changes, different changes in pressure, what is going on. So, like, look at this word, it's a cycle. So when there is a cycle, there is no starting point and no ending point, because this is a continuous cycle. So we start any one of the event in this cycle. Let's we start from the point when the blood is coming from the rest of the body into the vena cava. So this is the deoxygenated blood which is returning back from the tissue into the right side of the heart. So here is the semilunar valve. Yes, here we have the semilunar valve, we have the semilunar valve, and we have the semilunar valve. Look at the direction of the blood and the direction of the semilunar valve. So it's like the blood direction is here, like out, like in, like out, and like in the pulmonary vein. So 6 blood vessels overall, 6 valves we have, 2 here which are the atrioventricular valves, and 4 valves, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the vessels, which are called semilunar valves. Semilunar valves. So we have 4 semilunar valves and 2 atrioventricular valves. Now both these valves are antagonistic. Antagonistic means when these 2 valves remains open, these 4 valves will be closed, and when all these 4 will remain open, these 2 will be closed, and that's a lub-dub sound in the heartbeat. When all these 4 valves close, the 2 remains open. How does it work now in the cardiac cycle? So let's start the first point when the blood is coming from the rest of the tissue into the vena cava. Means at this time, vena cava, when forcing blood into the right atrium must be in relaxed position. So when it's relaxed, blood will be trickled down here in the right atrium because of its relaxation. So here, when the atria are relaxing, means we say that the ventricle is going to be contract. So we start from this point when both of the atria are going to contract. Keep one thing in mind, that both the atria will be contracted at the same time. Both left and right, both left and right atrium is mentioned over here. So both right atrium and left atrium will be contracted at the same time. So when they become contracted, they will squeeze the blood in the right and left atrium, force them down inside the ventricle. Now these 2 valves basically remain closed when there is less pressure. So the entire structure of heart is filled up of blood. There is no empty space. There is no space in the heart chamber. Just completely fill up of the blood. However, these 2 chambers, which are the ventricles, are somewhat bigger portions, and they have thick muscular walls. These wavy line shows the muscles in the ventricle. So it's a bigger chamber with thick muscles as compared to the extensible portion of the atria. Small portion and much more extensible. They have lesser number of elastic fibers, so they can accommodate lesser blood as compared to the ventricle. It means that pressure, in normal circumstances, the pressure always remains higher in the ventricles as compared to the atria. Now, if the pressure in the ventricle is higher than the atria, both these atrioventricular walls should be closed, because these are one-way valve. If the blood is forcing upward, they will shut these 2 valves. So blood cannot move back in the atria. So in case of higher pressure in the ventricle, the valves cannot be open. So if you want to push blood from the atrium into the right, from the right atrium into the right ventricle, there should be much more pressure. If the right atrium has more pressure than the right ventricle, then we can say that the blood will seep from the atrium into ventricle. Otherwise, it's not possible. So means there should be more pressure in the right atrium, and that is called atrial systole. atrial systole. When the atria is going to contract, means atria are going to contracting, that systolic pressure of the atria. So once this atria become contract, the blood inside will become at much more pressure. There's no way to leak out the blood, because there's only one way. If the blood is moving back, this wall will become closed, no way for the exit of blood. And there's the chamber, the way is blocked. So there's only one way for the blood to move down if there's more pressure. So as a result of more pressure, blood will be forced down into the right ventricle. So this is all about the atrial systole, and this is taking place at both the places. The blood is not only passing from the right atrium into the right ventricle, but also from the left atrium into the left ventricle, because they work simultaneously at the same time. So atrial contraction, it's like in this way. If you see, like, look at this, my hand, like if this is one of the lower chamber and this is the upper chamber, it's become relaxed. So it's like in this way is the contract and this is the relax, and when it become contract, it means relax. So means when you squeeze this side, this become enlarged, and when it becomes squeezed, this become enlarged, because the blood of this portion will be given to that portion, and when this part become contracted, the blood from this portion will be seeped downward to become enlarged. So now we are in the right ventricle. Blood is here in both the ventricles, in the right and in the left, and atrial systole is going to be end now. Now what's going on? The most important feature which I'm going to share with you, I'm just going to connect this tube here to here, because this is the pulmonary artery, and the blood now will move from this side. Keep in mind that this blood vessel is also full up of blood, and it moves toward the lungs for the oxygenation. Now, when the pressure increases in the right ventricle, it further pushes the blood towards the lung, and here is the semilunar wall. Keep in mind, this wall remains closed. Why? Because of the backward pressure from the lungs. So now there are two opposing forces here, one from the left, from the right ventricle toward the lungs, and one from the back pressure, because if this vessel remain continue here in the alveolus, so this is the closed system, and the pressure also away from the back side. So now there is a competition between the two types of forces, one the forward forces, one the backward forces, and this wall, if the forward pressure is higher than the backward pressure, these wall will become open and blood will be forced out. Now the same case is here in the left ventricle. Left ventricle is connected with the aorta, like in this way. It's connected with the left ventricle. Now what's going on? When the blood from both the atria arrived into the left and right ventricle, now the ventricle is going to start to contract. However, keep in mind the most important thing, the pressure which is generated by the ventricle is called ventricular pressure. Keep in mind, now I will use these words again and again. Ventricular pressure. Which pressure? Ventricular pressure. That pressure which is generated by the contraction of the ventricle, right? And the pressure which is generated by the contraction of the atria is called atrial pressure. Atrial pressure. The upper chamber pressure, when they contract, generate a force. So once the atria pressure exceeds from the ventricular pressure, the blood will be here in the left ventricle. And keep in mind that this portion already have some blood, so additional blood will generate more pressure in the left and right ventricles. Now there is additional third blood pressure, which is here, the backward pressure on this valve, and this is called aortic pressure, which is pressure in the blood vessel. Aortic pressure. Aortic pressure is the pressure when one heartbeat is going to complete, I mean when the ventricle is going to compress, to contract, a blood will be seep out from the aorta. Once the heart is going to relax, this blood will immediately flow back, but this wall is going to be shut down immediately to prevent the backflow. Although blood is not coming back, but it exerts a lot of pressure on this wall. Like, I'm just giving you one example of the door, which is like a door which is mentioned like the that should be open only in one direction. It's mentioned over here, pull or push. There's only one way of the opening of the door. It may be push or pull. Suppose if there is a door which is opening will be accompanied by pulling. So if a person is pushing on the door, although it's not open, but it will give a tough time to a person which is coming from the opposite side, because it's pushing the door, although it doesn't open the door, but the other person from the opposite side have to apply more pressure to open this door. In the same way here, like this is a one-way valve. It's like the pulling door. It can be opened like from this side, but this force does not allow this valve to be open. So two opposing forces, the aortic pressure and the ventricular pressure. So when will this valve open? Can you now imagine, if you want to open this valve, this pressure, which is called ventricular pressure, should be exceeding than this pressure, the coming back, which is called the aortic pressure. So here, now look at the sequence. First of all, what's going on in the, I'm just going to rub it. Atrial systole will generate a pressure called atrial pressure. The atrial pressure is exceeding slowly again and again, and when it exceeds over the ventricular pressure, so atrial pressure now increases, then the ventricular pressure. What will happen? Both what will be its impact? Both atrioventricular valves should be opened. Should be opened. Right. Now it's the time that the volume of the ventricle will be enlarged, not because of the pressure, but this is because of the accumulation of more blood in the ventricle as these two chambers have been completely contracted. Now this is all about the atrial systole and its impact. Now after atrial systole, we have ventricular systole and atrial diastole. Because when the ventricle is going to contract, the atria will be relaxed. It's the time now to become contract. Now there are two phases of the ventricular systole and atrial diastole, A and the same again B. What's going in the A and what's going in the B? There are two stages of the ventricular systole and atrial diastole. In the first stage, although both the ventricle start to contract, when they contract, their pressure is going to increase. Keep in mind the most important thing. When the ventricles are going to contract, its pressure is going to increase. A time will come when the pressure is exceeding then both the pressure in the atria. What will be its result? If the ventricular pressure is greater than the atria, these two valves will be immediately shut down because blood cannot move up. These are one-way valve only. So this is the first stage. Now, what about these valves? Are they open or closed? When these two valves remain closed, why? Because ventricular pressure is high. But although the ventricular pressure is high, but it's not too much high as compared to aortic pressure. I mean, the aortic pressure here is greater. That's why although these two valves remain closed, the pressure is not so much to open these four valves. So these four valves also remain closed, and that's the most crucial time in the heartbeat, when all the six valves remain closed. So we can discuss now these pressure changes. We can explain this with the help of this graph. On the y-axis we have pressure, and on the x-axis we have time in seconds. So it's 0.1 second, 0.2 and so on till 0.8 seconds. One heartbeat is completing in 0.8 seconds for this person. Now look at here, this black line, this one, I'm just going to show you, like this black line, this one, it is, I'm just going with a black line, it is the atrial pressure. It is the atrial pressure. And this blue line here, this blue line, it's like should be clear. So this blue line here, this one, this blue line represents the ventricular pressure. Ventricular pressure. And this green line here represents the aortic pressure. Three different pressures we have. So look at the start of this graph, when we talk about the time from 0 to 0.1 second in this time slot, which pressure is greater? Look at here, irrespective from this, it is the highest pressure in the aorta, which we have discussed, the coming back pressures in the vessel. But if you compare these two pressures, the black one and the blue one, the black one is the atrial pressure, which is higher than the blue, the ventricular pressure. So in such time interval, like from 0 to 0.1, atrial pressure is more than the ventricular pressure. It means here at this point, this blue line is going to increase. So now at this point, after the spot, this ventricular pressure is going to be increased as compared to atrial pressure. That's why I mentioned here AS means atrial systole. At this time it is the atrial systole. The atria is going to be contracting. So when the atria are contracting, their pressure is going to increase, and the pressure is increased as compared to ventricular, the larger chamber, because it's not contracting now, and that's why at this time blood is flowing. If you please focus this camera here, if the atria is going to contracting, the pressure here increasing, which is this black line actually increasing, and the pressure in the ventricle is slightly lower with this blue line. So as an impact, the blood will move downward here, and at this time both the atrioventricular valve should be opened. Now exactly at this point, at 0.1 something, the blue line increasing, the pressure in the ventricular pressure, the ventricular pressure is going to increase now. Why this ventricular pressure is increasing? Because it's now the time for the ventricle systole. It's now the ventricle is going to contracting, and when they start contraction, their pressure is slightly increasing as compared to atrial pressure. So once this, if somebody asks you here at this point, what do you think? The atrial ventricular valve should be open or closed? Keep in mind again the question. At this point, the atrioventricular valve, this valve should be opened or closed. If the pressure in the lower chamber is high, they will prevent the backflow, so the valve should be closed. That's why we say the atrioventricular atrioventricular valve closed. Why closed? Because the ventricular pressure is greater than the aortic pressure. However, look at this green line, which is aortic pressure. Although ventricular pressure is greater than the atrial pressure, but it is lower than the aortic pressure. Means this pressure, the backward pressure is very high than this pressure. So when this pressure, the aortic pressure is high, this valve should be remain closed. It cannot be open, as it trying to open it, but this is lower than this one, so cannot open. The same is the case here. This pressure is lower than the backward pressure, so this wall is also remain closed. So this wall closed, of course this wall closed, and all these semilunar valves closed, while these two valves also remain closed. So this is the time when all the 6 valves remain closed. So means, once again here, at this point, all the 6 valves close, and a point comes here. At this point, what is going on? The ventricular pressure exceeding than the aortic pressure. So what do you think at this point actually? Which valve should be open? When the ventricular pressure is greater than the aortic pressure. This pressure is high than this pressure, so the valve should be open. And that's why we see the semilunar valves open. It opens here. So it means from 0.1 to 0.16, about 0.16, all the 6 valves remain closed, and immediately at this point the valves will be open. So this is the time duration where all the 6 valves in the heart chamber remain closed. Now ventricular pressure is maximum here, and now the time of the heart muscles to slowly come back to the original position. So pressure once again is going to fall, and it falls so much that once again the aortic pressure exceeds than the ventricular pressure. So if somebody asks you at this point, what will happen? Which valve should be open and closed? So this semilunar valve was open here, it will close again. So we say semilunar valves remain closed. It means the ventricular pressure is falling again back from here, from this point till this point. Once again, all these 6 valves remain closed, because when the pressure falls, ventricular pressure falls, a time will come when it falls so much that the atrial pressure, which is this pressure once again, exceeding. So once it's exceeding, these 2 valves will be open again. So that means at this point we say that atrioventricular valves will be open. So it means the atrioventricular valves closed here, and here it opens. The semilunar valves opens here, and here it closed. So keep in mind the position of these blood vessels where these valves remains open and closed. And once this pressure here become increasing in the ventricular systolic pressure, now the blood is forcing, once this valves open, when will it open? When the ventricular systolic pressure become increased, so the blood will remains circulating here, and this valve also remains open, and in this way the cardiac cycles continue. So this is the way how the cardiac cycle work, and this is about different partial pressure, different pressures which are generating in the different chambers of the heart and in the blood vessels to circulate it. Thank you very much.